So I just so that's my slides up there now. Good, thank you very much. So thank you so much for having me here and being part of this presentation. It would have been lovely to be in Vilnius in person. It's a place I really would love to see, but in this case, I'm doing it from sunny Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. I want to start by just taking a minute to reflect that I'm doing this presentation from the traditional land of the Yagara and the Turrbal people, which are the First Nations people in the area where I live. And I want to reflect and pay my respects to the elders, those past and present, and also those leaders who are emerging, because this always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and we need to see it as such. So I'm here to talk about reaching men, and it made me think a little bit about what identities we normally try to reach men in, and how we go about it. And it made me think that often we try to reach men as victims, as poor people who are exposed to something that we need to help because they are victims, or sometimes we try to read men as uninformed, that it's just because we lack enough knowledge, and if we know more about things and if we are more informed, then we wouldn't get ourselves into all the trouble we're getting ourselves into. We sometimes, oh, sorry, I just realized I just moved something into the screen, so that was not. We sometimes try to reach men as dumb. That it's just because we're not smart enough that we haven't quite worked out how to look out for ourselves, and we need more help and more support to get there. Or we sometimes try to reach men as toxic, as people who have a culture and a way to do business that not only hurt ourselves and hurt people around us. And of course, sometimes that's true. Like sometimes men are victims, sometimes men are uninformed, and sometimes we're even dumb. Sometimes, and some of us really have a culture that is very toxic, and it's toxic to both ourselves and those people around us, but not all the time. And I suppose what I'm trying to do here in this presentation is to give an example about how we can use the lived experience to identify those problem areas and turn them into solutions, to see whether we can use those things that we are trying to mitigate or deal with, and actually say, can we take that weakness and somehow turn it into a strength. So what I want to talk to you about today is I want to talk how I reach men, and perhaps that's the easiest one, because last time I looked, I was one. I've been a man all my life, and I identify as such. So I'm closely connected to men. But I do want to share my story about my journey as a man, and my journey as a man from a plumber to a suicidologist. And then I want to talk to you about the story of Mates in Construction, about how we used lived experience in 2007 to construct a unique program, and really based on trying to find solutions to problems within our industry. And that's since become an intervention for the construction, mining, energy, and most lately the manufacturing industry across Australia, but also in New Zealand, and we're doing some work with some people in Canada and the US as well. And then I want to share with you some of the evidence for the Mates model, and then come with some closing considerations. So that's sort of what I intend to do over the next 40 minutes or so. So let me talk about my favorite subject. Let me tell you about me. I'm the founding CEO of an organization called Mates in Construction, and that's the organization I will talk a lot about in this conversation. At the moment, I'm also the interim CEO of the Mental Health Lived Experience Peak in Queensland. So that's an organization that's been funded and started with funding by the Queensland state government for the purpose of providing a collective voice of consumers of the Queensland mental health system for systems change and systems advocacy. I'm lived experience advisor to Suicide Prevention Australia, I'm a counsellor on the Queensland Mental Health and Drug Advisory Council. I'm chair of Queensland Workplace Health and Safety Board. I'm suicide prevention advisor to an organisation called Living Works, which is a Canadian organisation, but I work with the Australian branch. In my spare time, I'm also a PhD candidate where I'm looking at the issue about help offering amongst men in suicide prevention, and particularly motivational factors. And in between, when I'm bored, I'm principal of a consultancy called Semicolon Consulting, which is really about trying to bring resources together for specific projects around suicide prevention, trying to make sort of collective impact around suicide prevention on various projects. But that is, of course, not me. This is me. This is what really matters to me. This is the people I care for. This is the people that is important what they think about me, and it's important what I think about them. And they're the people that I want to come home to, and that's the real context. Because I think it's important that we remember in all our contexts, we have a professional persona, but we have the real persona below it. And for me, due to my own experiences, those kind of things have sort of tended to flow together and become one, where I've been very fortunate actually having a career that is very closely aligned with who I am as a person. And I want to share that with you. I want to share with you a little bit about my program. This idea about why would anyone change from plumbing to suicide prevention, what could the motivators for that be? As was alluded to, I was born in Denmark at a fairly young age, and I grew up in a very, very loving family. I had an older sister that was 6 years older than me, and I had a brother that was 10 years older than me. So I was sort of the young toy of the family, the one that everybody protected, the one that everybody cared for. And so I had a really, really great upbringing. I went to school. I absolutely hated school. And I was very stubborn. So when I went to grade 9, I said, I had enough. I'm just not going to do this anymore. That's not fun anymore. Mum and Dad had this sort of thing: you either earn or you learn. So I couldn't leave school unless I did something else that was career building. So I walked the streets and harassed all the local construction companies and tradies in the area until somebody finally felt pity, or just felt that if they offered me apprenticeship, I would stop harassing me. So I started as a plumbing apprentice when I was 15, and I got to leave school halfway through grade 9 to start that apprenticeship. And I was happiness defined. Like, it was the best thing ever. I got to do things that was constructive. I got to do things that was creative. I got to earn money for it. People appreciated, people valued my skills and my opinions. It was absolutely pure bliss for me. But when I was about 17, I started losing interest in things. I started losing pleasure from things. I started to feel like I lived behind a plate of glass, that I could see life happening around me, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't engage with it. I couldn't relate to it. I could see all those people around me that I intellectually knew loved me and loved me dearly, but I couldn't feel it, and I couldn't reciprocate. And I built up these feelings of deep guilt and shame, and being a burden to people around me, all those kind of things. And eventually I tried to take my own life to escape that. I was defined with defined with a mental illness. I got to try mental health facilities of various kind. It was the early days, or the 1980s. The antidepressants weren't as crash hot as they are today. So I got to try a whole heap of drugs. I didn't want to do things by half, so I also developed a drug and alcohol habit. So there was a whole heap of things that I got to try in a very short period of time. In that period, that employer that took me on as an apprentice, it was unthinkable for him that one of his apprentices would not complete his apprenticeship. That would be a major shame for the business. It was just not going to happen. And they had no idea about mental health, but they had an idea about plumbing apprentices. So through my apprenticeship, I would have to turn up in my boss's office every morning. he would do an assessment about whether it was one of the days I could face the clients or whether it was one of the days I had to work in the workshop where he could keep an eye on me and sort of support me a bit. And when he couldn't rely on me due to my drinking, I would get an antabuse on Mondays, and on Wednesdays I could still have a drink over the weekend, but I would stay sober during the week. And through that, I actually got through my apprenticeship. And you have periods, good times, and you have bad times. And through the good times, I met a woman and I married. And after about 6 years, when I was about 23, I felt I was getting better. But I'd been ill for that long that people started seeing me as my illness, and I was defined by my illness. And I couldn't escape the role of being the unwell person. So I talked to my wife about, saying, we probably need to do something different. And we worked out that traveling to Australia would be just about far enough to be able to reinvent myself as a well person. So I moved to Australia in 1988 and worked in the plumbing industry in Australia. And in Australia, I did what apprentices, what migrants do the best. I pointed out to the Australians everything that they did wrong and how they should do things more like we did in Denmark to make things better. And the natural progression from there, of course, was to become a union official. And I was an official of the Plumbers Union for 13 years, and I got to lead the union for 7 years as a state secretary and national assistant secretary. And through that period, I lost several members to suicide. And other officials and other leaders had the same experience. And we talked about it, said, that can't be right. We went to another funeral. It just can't be right. We have to do something about this. And we didn't know what it was to do, but eventually we worked out that we needed to work out whether what we were seeing anecdotally was a truth or whether it was just statistical blips. And that led us to a partnership with the Australian Institute for Suicide Research and Prevention. And in 2006, they provided us with a report and investigation of factors associated with suicide and recommendations for the prevention of suicide in the Queensland commercial building and construction industry. And we got that report, and it was shocking reading because it said that we had much higher suicide rates than average, that our young workers, our apprentices were the highest risk groups, that we were more likely to drink and drop than other people, more likely to be separated, divorced, a lot less likely to have asked for help or support before dying by suicide. So it was really a big shock to read that. It was confirming what we've seen. It was that that's really bad. Somebody should really do something about this. And then we patiently waited for someone to turn up, and they didn't. And eventually we worked out that perhaps someone was us. And by then I decided it was time to have a midlife crisis. So I had sort of tossed my job in as a union official, and I was going to go traveling through Asia and backpack and fight myself and all those kind of things you do when you have a midlife crisis. And but what happened was that the people in the industry says, we don't want someone to tell us what to do. We want to lead this. We want the construction industry to design something for us, informed by people who can read and write by all means. But we actually want to be the leaders in this. So people came to me and said, you've been going on about this mental health and suicide. Would you mind finding out what it is we need to do to implement the recommendations of this report, and then you can have your midlife crisis after that. And that was about in 2007. So we then started a consultation process where we said, how do we see ourselves as an industry? How do we see ourselves as workers? How do we see ourselves as employers? How do we see ourselves as industry organizations? How do we see ourselves, how does mental health professionals see us? What kind of industry are we? And what are we like when we try to apply a level of realism to it and actually ask the hard questions of ourselves? What is really going on? So we went out and spoke to workers, and workers talked about an industry with lack of job security. We talked about an industry where we start in the morning, we finish in the afternoon, and that job security. You change employers 2 or 3 times every year. And any good employers with any sense would never invest in their people, because whoever you invest in today works for your competition tomorrow. So workers tell us we can't talk to our boss about mental health. We can't even talk to them about physical health. In this industry, there's only room for 100% of a worker, because if you only got someone for 6 months, you don't want 95%, you want 100%. So if we have any signs of weakness, we're the first one off the job. and we're the last one to be put onto the next job when it happens, so it won't work. We talked to employers, and the employers said, this industry is hyper competitive, so we are all about risk management. Every job is won on tight margins, on tight time frames. If something goes wrong on a project, we're playing catch up for the rest of the project. We're never going to catch up again. So it just won't work to do anything. We're not going to take any risk, because as an employer explained to me, he said, Jorgen, I've only lost 2 apprentices to suicide. I don't know I have a problem with suicide. I have no intention of finding out, because if I find out, I have to do something about it. And if your program is not the right thing to do, then I've imported the risk into my site I didn't have before. We don't do that in our industry. We are mitigating risk. We're not creating risk. So again, that was really encouraging. So we have this industry where we are highly competitive within ourselves, amongst ourselves, between businesses, and you really can't put yourself out there because you become at a competitive disadvantage. If you know anything about the Australian construction industry, you'll know that there's a very fractured and conflictual relationship between labor and business. It is an industry where we fight a lot, where there's a lot of industrial disputes, there's a lot of underpayments, there's a lot of lack of adherence to agreements, there's disputes over safety. So if we do anything and it's employer aligned, then workers won't trust us. And if we do anything that's union aligned, then employers won't let you on site. So again, that was truly encouraging. And then we talked to mental health professionals, said it's all very well and good, but men don't seek help. We tried, we have done an awareness campaign, we've done stupid cartoons, we have done films, we've done everything to explain to men why they seek help. They just don't do it. And it let us think about, well, that was perhaps the first epiphany we had. Said, if men don't seek help and you can't make us do it, why on earth do you keep asking us? Why don't you find something we're good at and ask us to do that instead? So we said, what about if we actually find out what we're good at? And for all I know for myself, I come home from work, I talk to my wife, she talks about the problems we're having with our daughter at school. I listen to it for 5 or 10 minutes. I tell her exactly how to fix it, because I got some older kids as well, so I know the game. And she never appreciates it. But for me, there's no point having this conversation if we're not trying to drive a solution. I'm a natural help offerer. So why don't we actually turn it around to something we're really good at? We can't stop offering help even when it's not good domestic politics to do it. So we said, well, that's perhaps the first thing we can really do. So we then said, well, these are the issues we have to solve if we're going to be successful. And we said, really, if we want to do that, we have to set the bar particularly a little bit harder than we normally do. So we said, success is when Mates Construction is no longer a program we run on site, but a way we do business. That made it very clear this program doesn't have a start and an end. It has a continuous process, and it actually deals with cultural change rather than suicide prevention. That has to be the long game. And by defining that definition of success and applying that to those problems, we came up with this sort of program model. In the first version of that, we had 4 pillars, and those 4 pillars were research and evidence, raising awareness, building strength, and connecting to help. But when we started working with it, so that can't work. It actually has to be a continuous cycle where we come back to the same things again and again, but at a higher level. So when we look at the MATES program, we got the ASRAP report. The ASRAP report highlighted the program. We engaged the industry around doing that. We then, from that engagement, developed awareness, and we go out to the industry. We talk about that, and we talk about how we do that. We provide information to the industry, toolbox talks, and so on. We have field officers who are embedded with the industry, and that engage workers. And when workers are engaged, they will volunteer, they become connectors and assist workers in the program. We then hand the program over to them so they own it. And that local ownership gives faith and trust and a local drive in the program. That gives trust in the program. That means that people trust us to actually be connected to help. So we then create an infrastructure for support and help on site through the volunteer network, connectors and assistant field workers. We provide a 24/7 support line. We have case management service to try to be that sort of missing middle between workers in crisis and the system. And we're right to the same place again, because people will then start trusting us. We evaluate that and see that we're successful in it. We identify further industry needs, engage industry around that. And then the next level is we're doing a blueprint around mental health and apprenticeship training and stuff like that. I want to talk about that later, but it then comes back to the same place, but at a higher level. So that is the philosophy behind MATES. It's not a program that has a start and an end. It's a continuous process that you engage in as an industry. This was an article of Anthony Jorm that I read a few years ago, and it's quite depressing. What Anthony Jorm did was he looked at suicide rates in Australia over a 20 to 30 years process, and you noticed that things had not actually changed significantly over that period of time. And then he overlaid that with all the different national initiatives we've had, all the different interventions we've had, gun buybacks and industry plans and headspace and all sorts of things, and said we've done all those things, but we still haven't actually changed significantly the suicide rates. So that's a little bit depressing. Obviously, he asked the question, he said, well, we shouldn't jump to the conclusion that it's because of these things doesn't work. It could actually be that suicide rates would have been a lot worse if we'd done nothing. So I'm not saying that these things doesn't work, but I'm just saying that having done all the things, having record investment in mental health and suicide prevention over this period of time, we haven't actually significantly changed the dial. And perhaps that is because we haven't really fundamentally changed the paradigm about how we connect with people. Most of those interventions, not all of them, but most of the interventions have actually been about providing new programs and services, new specific services, new tailor-made services in the community. And this brings me to a little bit of an explanation about how the MATES in construction program actually work. It works this way that people go to work when they have a crisis, because so much of our hope and aspirations actually sit in our ability to make money and to go to work. Over the years, we created all these services, and in the construction industry, we actually had a whole heap of industry-provided services as well. Any work on the industry had access to 30 hours worth of counseling, free of charge for them and their family if they're a member of a union. There's lots of things in the industry, but people didn't take them up and didn't connect with them, because once you are in a crisis, you're so busy just keeping your head above water that actually reaching out for help is too difficult. It's just too hard to do. I remember that after I started MATES up and I had handed out 10,000 pens with the MATES in construction phone number on it and talked about how we need to connect and support and get help and all that sort of stuff, I went through a divorce and I moved into this little unit and I was sitting one night and I was having a dark night and I thought, well, I better walk the walk rather than just talk the talk. I'm going to call up and talk to someone. And I wasn't going to call the number on the pens because I didn't really want to talk to myself. So I called the men's helpline. And I hung up 3 times before I had the guts to stay on the line until somebody actually answered the phone. Asking for help is scary. It takes energy. It takes courage. And when you're in crisis, sometimes we don't have the courage and we don't have the energy. Whether we are a man or a woman, I don't actually think this is particularly male. I think this is across the board. And the rates of suicide attempts amongst women would speak to that. But I think that it's so hard to reach out for help when we're really in crisis. So MATES is not a mental health and suicide prevention organization. MATES is a construction organization. In the construction industry, some people lay bricks, some people do plumbing, some people are architects, some people are engineers, some people are office workers, but they're all construction workers. We are construction workers who are doing suicide prevention and mental health. And we employ field officers, and those field officers connect with sites as any other service do. And they connect with sites at a local level. And a very important condition of MATES is it's free of charge. So nobody pays for MATES services on site. So it means that field officers can sort of go onto the site, talk to the local project management, talk to the local union people, say, do you want to run the MATES construction program? A lot of the times they said no, particularly in the early days. Sometimes they said yes. Maybe the project manager had lost someone to suicide that made it important to do something. So when they said yes, so well, that's fine. Can we just stop everybody and have a 1-hour conversation with them around suicide and mental health? And we're using the social identity model for collective action, or as we called it back then, because we didn't know the model back then, we called it anger, hope, action. We went and talked to the construction workers and made people angry about the fact that injustice was happening to us as a community. It was an injustice that we had suicide rates that was higher than everybody else's. It was injustice that we had poor mental health, and that we needed to do something about it. We presented the fact that you can actually look out for your mate to something doable. There's efficacy in doing it. It could be explained in a way that made it really practical and easy to get on board with, that we could see could make a difference. And we asked people to do something really easy, which was that you can actually volunteer with a mate in construction program. You can connect your mate to help, or you can connect yourself to help. Anger, hope, action. And once we did that, we gave people a white sticker, because if you know anything about the construction industry, you know stickers are important. They go on the hard hat, and sometimes it's actually the stickers keeping the hard hat together. But everybody would then get a white sticker that would go on the hard hat. We could all see that we actually had this social contract, and on this side we're looking out for mental health and suicide prevention. We're taking a vote to that effect. Now it looks like this now. Now what we've done is we put a protected ring around this person with these issues that are still struggling, and that person know what it looks like. They might even know what it feels like. We don't use the F word a lot in the industry, so we don't talk about feelings that much, but we talk about what it looks like when somebody is struggling, and then I would actually know what it feels like as well. But of course, when everybody knows what it looks like, as long as one person notices something, we can actually make a difference. But having everybody around, we increase the risk of the chance of somebody seeing something. The next thing we then do is we collect all the volunteers and go back to the site later and ask the managers to release 1 in 20 of the workers on site to become what we call connectors. And a connector is a mate who can keep you safe while connecting you to help. Mates is using Living Works Safe Talk training for that, Safe Talk training. And it's a very deliberate choice, because Safe Talk training is skills-based. It's not knowledge-based. Quite often when we are clever, we want to tell everybody else what we know about things. It's just not very helpful to know what we know. What is much more helpful is to know what you can do. So providing people with skills is really useful, and people tend to use those skills. If we provide people with knowledge, we sometimes get worried and scared about actually engaging in case we do something wrong. So we provide people with skills about how to actually connect with somebody who's suicidal. We do that on site, and once we've done that, people get a green sticker, because if you know anything about the construction industry, stickers are really important. And that green sticker go on the hard hat. And what we then know is, if you've done the white sticker training, is all you have to do is find somebody with a green sticker, and those people with the green stickers would then know what it looks like if somebody is struggling. Now, once we've done that, we build another ring to close up that gap between people when they're struggling and the services we have. So when somebody is struggling, somebody with a white sticker might actually notice it. But if you just notice and don't really know what to do, then you might do nothing. But by having connectors on the side, it becomes really easy to do something, because all you have to do is just find somebody with a green sticker, and they would know what to do next. And because they got the green sticker on the hard hat, it means that they got the social permission to actually go up and ask, mate, are you doing okay? Are you struggling? Can I help you? And they can then reach out through that system of support. So we start closing that that gap in between workers when they're struggling and the services we have. The next level we then do is we then say on site, if we can get a few of the key workers, or maybe the workplace health and safety officer, maybe the first aid officer, maybe the union delegate, maybe an office worker, some of the key workers on site trained in intervention skills. And we use Living Works Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training for that, ASSIST. That's a 2-day workshop, and again, it is skills-based. It is very analogous to first aid training. You don't have to learn everything about the cardiovascular system to do first aid. You need how to count the compressions and make sure that people are ventilated, but that is much more skills-based than it is knowledge-based. So it's very much the same thing we're doing about ASSIST, and they get a blue sticker. It means that the people with the green stickers, the connectors, make it their business to find out who the blue sticker people are on the site, because they're the people who can be a resource for them. And we create a network of safety within that site amongst those people, and we engage them as volunteers with mates in construction. They're not doing this in their employed capacity. They do this as volunteers with mates in construction. And what we create out of this now is we have created a system of safety on site. That when somebody's struggling, somebody will notice, they'll connect with somebody who knows what to do next. There's suicide alert, they can ask questions about it, they can motivate somebody to accept help, they can take them to an assist worker, they can provide safety for them, they can make an assessment about, do we need extra resources in here, or can we manage it? Do we need to take you to hospital? Do we need to make an appointment with a counselor? Or do you just need to come back and see me tomorrow till we keep you safe while you go through the crisis you're going through? So this is in a system of itself. What we have actually done is we have just copied the safety system as it already works on site. Nobody got on a construction site in Australia unless they have done a site safety induction. And they get a stick on their hard hat saying that they've done the site safety induction. We have a safety committee and we have safety reps. So if I see the handrails are missing, all I have to do is find somebody with a safety stick on their hard hat, and they will make sure that handrails get put back up before somebody falls off the side of the building. And if somebody gets hurt, we will trust the first aid person to come and have a look at it and say, does this cut need a Band-Aid? Do we need to take you to the doctor to get stitches, or do we need to call an ambulance to get you acutely treated? We can do exactly the same around suicide. So that's the system we create on site. Two important things with that is we do it as volunteers. And that means when one site finishes, we take the skills to the next site and we create a viral effect across the industry where workers are actually the ones who take the program with them with their hard hat stickers from site to site, from employer to employer. By providing a replicatable system on sites that are standardized, we create a standard for mental safety on site. And that actually creates a liability that needs to be risk managed. So by creating that process, we create a good virtuous cycle on sites where employers get on board with it as well. Once we have set that up, that program that gets handed over to the site and it belongs to them. And then workers do amazing things with it. They have connector committees, they do toolbox talks, they keep an eye on for when top-up training needs to be done. On the International Suicide Prevention Day, each day in September, they do fly the flag. So they can register their sites as volunteers with mates. They'll get a flag sent to them and they raise the flag on the crane, or they sign the flags and do all sorts of things. So last Suicide Prevention Day, there was 160,000 workers involved in activities registered in suicide prevention across construction sites, all done locally, done with their local volunteers buying into the mission. And what happened through this viral approach is employers says, we want to be part of that. Workers are talking about these kind of things. They're engaged with this. So employers then came to us and said, you have trust in the industry. Can you gather a roundtable of industry leaders to actually work out what we can do further upstream? So in 2016, mates conducted a roundtable of key unions and key employers, pulling them together with key leaders of the industry from industry, and said, what does good mental health and suicide prevention look like? And that led to the project called the Blueprint for Better Mental Health and Suicide Prevention. That is now a blueprint that covers workplaces more than 160,000 workers across Australia, which is a commitment that businesses sign up to for standards they want to apply around mental health and suicide prevention. I don't want to go through the details of it, but there has 5 sort of elements to it. It's based on Tony Lamontane's model, an integrated approach to workplace mental health, talking about promoting the positive impacts of mental health, reducing the harmful impact on work on mental health, providing mental health and suicide prevention literacy in workplaces, facilitate early intervention and treatment for people who are in need of support, and provide return to work and ongoing support for people who are struggling. And that model is now applied across the industry. I don't want to go through all the details, but it means in some ways in Queensland now, because it's been really widely approached across the industry, we've been able to go to the state government and says, you spend a lot of money on mental health. You spend a lot of money in the construction industry. Why don't you start making it a contractual obligation for contractors who want to contract with you to build your buildings, that they have good mental health and suicide prevention processes on their sites, because that will save you money in the mental health sector. And they have now started to putting that into the contracts so that people would have to sign up to the blueprint and engage in that in order to get, and that then they don't only apply it on their construction workplace for the government, they do it on all their work because they're done on 2 different systems. And that way we then have this flowing through. not by being really clever around suicide prevention and mental health, by understanding the lived experience of the industry, the dynamics of within the industry, we get better bang for our dollar. Now, let me talk about some of the evidence for MATES. And I want to say that this is not deep evidence. There's 11 peer-reviewed articles around the MATES in construction program. And we're perhaps one of the most researched and evaluated workplace programs globally, but that doesn't set a very high standard. As part of the PhD, I've been sort of doing a bit of a review of the evidence forward. There's about 8 studies looking at construction, 2 mining, 1 energy. 6 of them look at just the general awareness training. 1 of them looked at the MAT training. MAT is delivering the same message using the anger, hope, action model, but using a different modality, using a conversational style rather than a presentation style. And we find that we get the same impacts, and we can use that on smaller sites. 1 looked at connector training, a few at the case management, and some looked at the whole of workplace. Most of them are quantitative, 1 of them are mixed method, and some of them are looking at coronial data. And most are pre to post training, but there's 1 longitudinal study over 3 months, and there's 1 that looks at workplaces pre 6 and 18 months post intervention, but it's not case matched, so it's not longitudinal. 2 of them looked at suicide rates and relative risk over time. 1 was a health economic, and 1 of them had a comparison group. Again, not very comprehensive evidence, but still significantly more evidence than what is generally applied in the sector. What those studies have found, that 7 studies found significant improvement from pre to post training. A lot of that was training effect, but pre to post. There was no significant difference between the modalities between GET, which is from larger sites, and MET, which is for smaller sites. There was a big deterioration of effects from over time over the 3-month period that we did the longitudinal. But what is really important is that the core messages of MATES, being that you look out for your mates and there's case management and support, that was maintained over the period where other suicide prevention messages was deteriorating. There was significant impact on mental health and suicide prevention literacy over the 18-month period in the mining industry when we tried that. Really interesting that mental health stigma, that workers found the mental health stigma had decreased in relation to their workmates and in relation to their family, but not in relation to, not to the same effect, not to a statistically significant effect in terms of their employer. We looked at the impact of skill level on age and gender and lived experience on how people received and engaged with the messages from mates. And it did find that there was a difference between the different groups, but all of them had statistically significant improvements, but there was a different message that resonated better and more directly with certain people and certain groups, and that was really useful in terms of moderating the program going forward. Really, really important. The vast majority of workers, in terms of help seeking and help offering, preferred informal resources. So mates, friends, family, relatives, those kind of resources were the ones that was most trusted and most preferred. And the least preferred resources were supervisors. And it's really important because a lot of workplace programs see supervisors as gatekeepers, but you have to remember that from a workplace point of view, they are often the ones who are the least trusted when it comes to people's mental health. And that was across construction, mining, and energy. When we looked at the connector training and the people who are volunteers who are often driving the program, there was a find that the mental health and suicide prevention literacy was improved quite significantly. There was increased help offering and help intention and confidence in that. There was interesting that participating in Safe Talk and the connector training actually improved people's feelings of their own mental health. So they felt better after having done the training than they did before. So talking about suicide and mental health significantly improved their feeling of mental health. When we did focus group and talked to people about what's significant about them engaging as volunteers with mates, they said it was industry-based. It was actually their program, an industry program. It was easy to participate. It came to them on site. It was delivered with a passion. This fact that it was actually one of their own delivering the program was really important. The lived experience was important. And that they wanted to engage in collective impact for benefit of the industry. When we talked to people who was in case management, not surprising, case management demands improved over time quite significantly with the program reach. Most referrals from union connectors and employers. Not big surprises there. That's generally where we go for help. But when we talked to people who had actually engaged in help and support through the MATES program, they said the things that was determining for them doing it was that the MATES actually used an industry language, a language that they were comfortable with, that they was embedded within the industry, so that the program was from within the industry, that it was peers taking leadership, that it was people like themselves that took leadership, and they took an enormous amount of lead from workmates advocating, saying, this is what happened to me when I was struggling, and I'm now in a better place. This is what happened when I helped my mate that was struggling with their mental health and suicide. Suicide rates, there's a new study that is in print at the moment. It's coming out very soon with Tony Lamontagne and Mahini and a few other people that have found that suicide rates have decreased quite significantly over the last 10 or 15 years in the construction industry in Australia. But initially, the studies that have been peer-reviewed and published there was an 8% reduction over the first 5 years of the MATES, but it was not statistically significant. There was a statistically significant reduction in relative risk of suicide of almost 10% over a 5-year period, and there was a return on investment of $4.60 per dollar invested in the program. Some of the work that I'm looking at the moment in terms of the PhD is very early days, based on 6 or 7 interviews, so it's very sort of preliminary stuff. Was that what people are saying to us is in the interviews, the reason that people volunteer, the relationship with the field office is extremely important, that they have people that they actually feel they're part of a movement. They're not just on their own, they're not just do-gooders, they're part of a movement for change. That one of the things I did not expect to find was that MATES not only increase help offering, but actually also create a social duty for help acceptance. This idea that we use a anchor hope action model to motivate and mobilize collectively means that if I'm offering help, then you're not pulling your weight if you don't accept the help when it's offered to you. And that actually makes it easier for people to accept help because they're now helping the industry. And the final bit is that lived experience and duty to the industry was really important motivators for people to get on board. So to round off, the issues that we identified was the itinerant nature of the industry, the hyper-competitive nature of the industry made it very difficult for employers to engage with the program, importing a new risk. The fractured relationship between unions and employers made it very risky to place it, and the fact that it wouldn't work because men don't seek help. There were the problems. The solutions was to why don't we make workers the active ingredient, so workers take the program from site to site. That means we run with 100% of the workers on this site, we have 20% of the workers on the next 5 sites. They will go to their local managers and business, say, let's run the program, and we create a viral effect across the industry where workers, the fact that workers are actually itinerant is the biggest strength of the program in terms of making multiply. We standardized it, so we bought into safety culture, and it's now today with 250,000 workers in the program, means that it's the businesses that are not running the program that are running the risk. Because what if they have a suicide and they have done nothing with it? The fact that we are independent of both unions and employers meant that we were trusted by both unions and employers, which meant that when we were going to engage at a higher level of the spiral, we were trusted to be the people to bring people together around that. And we focused on help offering rather than help seeking. So to round off, if we want to reach men, how do we turn problems into solutions? This is really hard to say to researchers, but we actually don't start defining the problem before asking people to be involved. That's really difficult because you have to define a research project before you can get funded. You have to write a whole heap of things already before you can get funded. That is not conducive to good outcomes. I know that's very much a reality, but it's difficult. Don't do token consultations. If you're not fair income about it, don't ask people. Or alternatively, if you get people in, be very clear about what the boundaries of the consultation is. We're not asking you about this because this is already defined. We're only asking you about that. Be prepared for solutions that might not involve you. We all want to do what evidence-based, we all want to do what is needed, but sometimes it's actually not us that are needed. So we have to be prepared and open to the fact that we might not actually be part of the solution. And allow the community to lead. Have faith and trust in the communities to lead. If you had insomnia, here are some of the evidence I did refer to in the presentation. Here's a bit of an overview of it. And finally, I love to improve and I love to get better. There's a little barcode, and if you would like to take a quick snap of that and give me feedback, I would absolutely love you forward, and that would also give me an opportunity to engage with you if you want to talk with me further. thank you so much. If you haven't dropped off already, thank you for being part of this presentation. I can't hear you, sorry.
You see, I was speechless. I couldn't even say anything. That was simply fantastic. Thank you so much. I enjoy listening to you and was smiling most of the time. Your sense of humor is absolutely fantastic. Thank you. So we have several questions to start with. So why are there such high numbers of suicide in the construction industry? Is there a comparison with other industries?
I think that it's a number of things. I think it's a matter of demographics. The construction industry is a gathering place for people who most likely would have higher rates of suicide no matter where we gathered. We are men, we are lower skilled, we are very problem solution focused. So all of those kind of things would perhaps create a higher rate of suicide no matter where we were. On top, and culturally, how we interact with each other, again, that's perhaps a little bit more of an industry issue. On top of that, we then have very low attachment to our workplace, so that we don't have, men, we often connect around work, and we have much more fleeting working relationships because we move through the industry a lot more. So lack of job security, we work very long hours. We often work physically hard in physically demanding conditions, often work away from home. So there's a whole heap of risk factors sitting on top of that as well. So I think it's a combination, but I also think that we have to be careful about this worseism, where we always have to be worst in order to do something. When we talk about suicide, average is pretty awful. So let's just average be enough to get working on it as well.
Okay, thank you. And the connected question to the industry, are there women working in construction in Australia?
Absolutely. And depending, like it's sort of almost a little bit reversed. We have more women in the higher skill areas. So there's a bigger proportion of women amongst architects and engineers and stuff like that than there is amongst the blue collar workers. So the highest risk groups are very, very male dominated. Probably talk about 97%, 95% or something like that. But we have done a bit of work on women, and women within the construction industry, although they're much lower group, take on a similar risk profile. So compared to other women, they are much higher risk of suicide as well, but still put them at a lower rate of suicide than the male counterpart within the industry, if that makes sense. The other part we have found out is that women proportionally are much more likely to volunteer with the MATES program, so they're much more likely to volunteer as connectors, and they're also much more likely to engage with the help provided through the case management and a support system that's provided through the program.
Okay, that's interesting, and I want to follow up on that question. When you say that women are more likely to act as caregivers, as connectors or support providers, what do you make of that? Is it working?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I don't actually. I think in terms of the help seeking, it's perhaps what we see elsewhere as well, that women might be more likely to use services than men. But I don't know. I'm very careful I could get into that sort of very stereotypical sort of view that women are more caring, and perhaps that is part of it. Is perhaps that women are more naturally the people we feel comfortable going to. So people are saying, if the guys I'm working with is coming to me anyway, why don't I just get some skills to do it a little bit better? So there might be a little bit of that happening as well. I don't actually know. I think there's an area for better understanding there. And we have when we work in other industries like energy and mining, there's a bigger proportion of women in those industries. So we find that women are quite it becomes an industry culture, which is perhaps a more male dominated culture. The more male dominated the industry is.
Okay, thank you. One more question. During a presentation, you mentioned that you notice similarities on the way men and women react to difficulties. For example, when experiencing crisis. Could you comment a bit more from your experience, what are similar, different aspects when we speak about providing help for men and women?
I think that I do this sort of specifically around suicide, and I'm just a little bit worried about this sort of narrative that says that men have higher rates of suicide because we don't seek help. I think it's a little bit lazy, and I think we need to be a little bit deeper than that, because if that was true, then women wouldn't attempt suicide at nearly the rates they are. If the help seeking was, I think that if we understand the suicidal crisis as a point of isolation and perhaps burdensomeness, then reaching out for help when you are in that crisis can be very, very exhausting. And I think there's more similarities between men and women at that crisis point than there's not. And I honestly think that women find it difficult to reach out as well as at that point. So I think that I'm just a little bit worried about the stereotypes about this sort of help-seeking, help-offering, because I don't actually think it's true, and I think we miss something really important when we do it. I think we need to find ways for both men and women in suicidal crisis to feel comfortable reaching out, and I think that it's really based on help-offering. It's about having the skills in the community for people to reaching into people when they have the crisis rather than expecting them to reach out.
Yeah, okay, thank you for making that point, because really when focusing on suicide rates, we often forget that actually women are more likely to attempt suicide. And as you say, if it's only a problem of help seeking, then why this is happening? And yeah, that's a very, very good reminder. And I think I liked also very much one of the points that you made, that you don't have to be the worst to be offered help. When you were referring to, construction building industry, because in Lithuania, we have this for a long time, the highest suicide rate and so on. But really, I hope that when suicide rate is lower finally, and it's decreasing here, that we still will see this as a problem that we have to work on. And if men have more suicide rate, it doesn't mean then that women are not supposed to have help offered, or if older people have higher suicide rate, it doesn't mean that young people do not need suicide prevention. That's a very important point to make. Okay, thank you. I see. I think there are no more questions. We still have some time, so we can keep on, speaking, and I hope new questions arrive. Actually, I have a personal one.
Yes.
You started your presentation from saying from a plumber to suicidologist. Yeah. Do you think that the opposite is possible, the reverse is possible, or is complicated?
Well, I think it is. Absolutely. I think that it's an interesting thing because I think a lot of the stuff what I think we need to really start thinking about is how we use lived experience. And when I'm saying from plumber to suicidologist, I actually think that in most of my work in suicide prevention, my plumbing qualification has been the most important. That understanding of my context and my industry and my people, and then being prepared to find out what people who are cleverer than me can advise me to do, is a really strong starting point and can be really empowering as an industry. And this is a little bit where we somehow find out what the solutions are, and we're then trying to find a good community to put those solutions onto. And I think we need to try to as a sector, as a suicide prevention mental health sector, to try to think a little bit the other way about saying, how can we actually find a way for people to come to us with their problems, and how can we actually base our solutions in their problems, so we're not a hammer running around looking for a nail. We actually, we're fit for purpose.
Okay, so thank you again for being so much down to earth, and on the other hand, developing such a, I would say, comprehensive and sophisticated, program, that addresses the issues in construction industry, but even broader, developing this attitudes towards help. It was absolutely fantastic having you here. So should I say good night or what?
Yeah, you can say good night. It's 7 o'clock here, so yes, it's early evening. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.